Hello, everyone. Welcome to our inaugural podcast of Happy Hour, Happy Patients. My name is Lisa Blue, and I am your host today. I'm excited to be joined by Ryan Lewis, who is one of the original founders of Providertech. I am the Chief Clinical Innovation Officer at Providertech, and Ryan and I have worked together for many years. So today we're going to talk a little bit about the history of Providertech, Ryan's ideas, to start Providertech and a little bit of the journey along the way. So we're so happy that you joined us today. Ryan, thank you for joining us as well. So I'm going to give you a little background into Ryan. Ryan Lewis has worked across the healthcare technology industry in enterprise sales, digital marketing, client success, and as an operations executive, including over 20 years of technology leadership. He has over 10 years working with startups, venture capital, and as a founder. Ryan also has consulting experience with Fortune 100 consulting firms, including United Healthcare, Accenture, and Dignity Health. Outside of work, Ryan loves spending time outdoors with his wife and 3 kids, and he's an avid fan of Arizona sports teams, and attending Cardinals and Suns games whenever he can. Welcome, Ryan.
Thank you. And well stated. I appreciate the introductions.
All right, awesome. So we're so excited here to talk a little bit about the journey of Providertech. I would love it if you would just kick this off by sharing what was your initial ideas around Providertech. What were you doing in your career at the time when this idea was born? If you could just take us back to those early days.
Yeah, and we've got to back it up a few years, and there was a group of 3 original co-founders, and it's a little bit of a funny story because we did kind of get in a little bit of trouble back in the day. So we were working for an unnamed large provider group in the industry, and we were the 3 of us. It was myself, John, and Eric were the original 3 founders, and we added on one other founder a little bit later to help us build out some of the development. But the 3 of us were very focused on patient engagement solutions, and we tended to bend the rules a little bit. So not that I wasn't entirely a corporate Kool-Aid or corporate fit, but we like to move a little bit at a faster pace, I guess. And so that was, always one of my challenges, I guess, as I started right out of school for Ernst & Young and did some IT consulting for large, big payer and provider groups. And then did go into industry at this one large provider group where the 3 of us mischievous founders got together, scheming up this idea. And so one of the 3 founders was actually part of the ASU SkySong Edson program. So he was working actually in the same program as you, Lisa, the Master of Health Innovation. And so John was kind of got us access to some neat like startup things where we were able to do like a little pitch. And so we built the concept and the idea around obviously some of the, our experience, some of the work that we had been doing in the healthcare space, but, uniquely different to the things that we were doing. And obviously something that we felt was, very innovative, right? And so the very initial idea, and this was kind of around the early times of when Twilio was really just coming out. And so some of these text messaging APIs were fairly new to the industry. And there was a lot of challenges in healthcare at the time. There was a regulation called meaningful use, or specifically it was the meaningful use 2 regulations that pushed the patient engagement strategies. And one in particular that was kind of our initial idea was around getting discharge instructions to patients quickly so they could meet that meaningful use requirement. And so we said, hey, wouldn't it be cool? Like, we know how to integrate with big healthcare systems, and it'd be so easy if someone just sent a text message. And so that was kind of our initial idea. Now, where we kind of got in trouble is, our covert operation to build Providertech. And at the time we ended up calling ourselves Para Health Solutions, because we were actually put on suspension when we created the company. So the three of us, due to some of the work we were doing on the side, and one of us got excited and made a social media post about a company that was building IT solutions and software in the patient engagement space. And so we did get in a little bit of trouble and spent about a week on the bench, if you want to call it there. Gave us another week to work full time on the project.
Silver linings, right?
But the initial, that was kind of the, we did get in trouble. We were welcomed back, but ultimately, and we did ultimately win that pitch contest and became part of the Edson program. So that was one of the initial things, and we did end up pivoting and changing the name to Providertech when we officially created the LLC as a part of that Edson program. So those were the very early days, and that was kind of the initial story on how Providertech came to be. And I think most founding stories end with something that's a little bit against the grain. So that was as much trouble as we got in, but no lawsuits or anything like that, like Facebook, but at least a little bit of a story behind it.
Well, I think that's a really interesting story. And, I like your comment about the corporate Kool-Aid, right? Certainly when sometimes we're in really large organizations, whatever the industry, things can move a bit slower. So I'm glad that you guys encountered that. So that encouraged you to look for another path forward. So that's a wonderful story. And I bet I can guess who got excited on social media, but we won't say that in this podcast.
Actually, I don't think it's the person who you thought it might be.
But, okay. Yeah. All right. Very interesting. We'll talk about that offline.
I didn't say any last names, so it was John.
Oh, okay. Okay. That wasn't going to be
John,
my guess.
You're listening. You'll remember.
So, knowing your early experience obviously was deeply founded in the healthcare IT space. You worked in, obviously project development and implementation at those large systems. How do you think that really prepared you to really to take the idea of Providertech and really launch that and get that moving? And really also, what were some of the challenges and lessons learned along the way?
Yeah, I mean, and coming from the corporate world, you're kind of coddled, I don't know is the best word, but there you've got access to a lot of resources, attorneys, contract writers, project managers, project coordinators, software developers, just a plethora of resources at your disposal. So I do remember the moment when, ultimately I wasn't in Kansas anymore. And my path to entrepreneurship was gradual and, a little bit of somewhat of a risk averse. I did, there was some risk as I just, we did end up going on the bench and did, went against the grain with how we were initially founded. But for me, I really wanted to learn as much as possible before kind of jumping all in. So after working at that large provider group, I went to a venture-backed startup, very small company. And I had, as you explained with my background, had spent time with big consulting and then big provider groups. So a lot of big corporate background. And so I remember going over to this venture-backed startup called ClearData in the healthcare space, who are still around today and have kind of pivoted into a secure platform for healthcare to help protect your data when you're moving into the cloud. So at ClearData, that kind of that moment when I realized when I was not in Kansas anymore, I can recall I get there and I'm excited. I'm like, here we go. We're in a startup, venture back. This is great. I'm gonna be a big sponge here. And I was asked, hey, we've got a big client. I need you to put together, a statement of work. And I was like, oh, okay, perfect. Like, well, get me in touch with contract management and let me know who our attorneys are so that I can help facilitate and make that happen. So, and then Chris looked at me and he's like, huh? Like, no. Like, you're going to write the statement of work. We don't have any attorneys. We don't have any contract management. So I still remember that day where I was like, oh, that's how this works. Like, time to start rolling up your sleeves and figuring things out, right? The coddling is over. So, I mean, that's just kind of a small example of like a lesson learned where like you do in a startup and in a startup world and as an entrepreneur, you kind of have to roll your sleeves up and just figure it out. And, along the way, we've done different things and I've always kind of had that passion for entrepreneurship. I did, real estate on the side. And I think it was a little bit of just wanting to be able to do my own thing and create a solution and something that's different. And I think we did that there's a number of ways that I had started doing that early on, but it wasn't until I kind of started to learn more about like venture capital, working, doing it by working there, not just kind of diving all in and kind of consuming as much as possible. I actually spent a little over 5 years at ClearData in a number of different roles. And the company grew from, I think, we might have been like under $1 million in revenue when I started. And I know that the hope ultimately is $1 billion plus IPO. I don't know where they're probably closer to maybe half of that these days, but a very fast growing venture backed startup in a innovative space. And so it was a great, tons of lessons learned throughout, and where you just ultimately, and Lisa, as you know, I'm sure also kind of having that experience going to Providertech as a smaller company from the larger organizations, that it's, you figure it out ultimately, or it's just not a good fit for you.
Yeah, absolutely. So those of you that maybe don't know the story of how Ryan and I came to work together, I actually was a population health director at a large federally qualified health center here in the Phoenix area where Providertech is based. And I was introduced to Ryan and the Providertech team early on. They were awarded funding through, and Ryan, you can correct me on this, I think it was the Arizona Department of Health Services. Is that
That's
right?
Mm-hmm.
And so we began to work together at that time. My team was doing the work that they were eager to do as part of that grant award. And so those were really the early days. While Ryan and the founders were very excited about and had a lot of knowledge about the technology space and the security related to that. I came from the clinical space and really helped, influence some of that beginning development of Providertech and what we call our population health or care community solution today. And so through that time working together, first as a client, and then the last 5 years, I've had the distinct pleasure of being on the Providertech team and getting to work with our clients in the same way I worked with Ryan and his team early on. So it's been a really fun and exciting journey to each year. It's been a whole new experience year to year as we continue to grow and expand our team and expand our product and solution itself. So Ryan, one of the things that I've often heard you say when we're talking with potential clients or even our existing clients is the importance of people, process, and technology. And, I think because Providertech, in and of itself is a technology solution, I'm really interested in, and why do you think that model and that structure is really important? And really, how do you think that Providertech, in and of itself supports that model?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think it really applies. Well, it applies in a lot of different scenarios. So specifically, there's two ways I can think of the application. And when I'm talking to a client, right, I'm typically talking about the implementation or the solution specifically that we're going to provide to that client. And from that perspective, I think it's very important that when you're trying to solve for a problem, you're not putting the cart in front of the horse, right? So it's very difficult to just take a technology solution and think it's going to solve a problem that you have, right? It's very important that before you do that, that you have people, right? So good people help define a process, right? So people, it's important that you have people in place and people that you trust. So, and stakeholders that you trust. Because if you're building out an IT project or trying to solve for a problem, you need good leadership. So it really starts with the people, right? And then, and with that, you build on it. You say, okay, well, now what are we trying to do? What are we trying to solve for? Well, let's first do it without any technology. Can we create and maybe it's like, maybe you use a pen and paper, but now probably you're going to at least maybe use a spreadsheet for your row one. And when we say row one, that's kind of like that's like our proof of concept. That's the very first thing we want to do. So you need to have the good people, the right leadership in place. And then you need to build a process and define what that process is. And then the technology helps enhance the process, right? And population health, we know we can write down, here's our gaps in care. And we know that we need to outreach to these people, right? But we can do that without technology, without text messaging, right? There's a row one to that. I can pick up a phone call, or I can make a phone call. I can send mailers out, right? I can go knock on someone's door too. Like, I mean, there's a row one for everything. But if you don't understand who that population is, or if you're knocking on the wrong doors, then right, you're not solving the problem. So you need the right people in place, people like Lisa. And why we brought Lisa on is not only because she's an awesome person and great to work with, but she obviously understands population health. So she can help us solve this problem from an expert level perspective. We can put a process in place, and then we can take that technology as the secret sauce that makes us differentiate or do it better than anyone else. So I mean, that's when we're trying to solve a problem, that's people, process, and technology. And then I think the other perspective is when same thing if you're trying to build a company or a culture, right? From a Providertech perspective, like we think about great leaders. We're not going to just say, oh, well, we're going to drop in Lattice as a culture tool and we're going to have culture, right? That's not how it's going to work, right? We need to have the right people, the right leaders in place. And then we need to say, hey, we think we need to gain feedback from our staff on how we're doing. First, we can ask them. We can have one-on-ones. We can have great process. And then thirdly, we could say, hey, there's this really neat tool that makes it easier for us and we can be a little bit more efficient. So the technology is usually the last thing that you want to look at. So that's my advice. And whether you're building a company or whether you're trying to solve a problem within your company, that people is where you start, process, and then technology.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really great perspective. And, thinking about how we even approach when we're working with clients, that is exactly our approach, right? We don't just offer the technology itself. A part of that discovery process and onboarding is really understanding what our clients are doing today and what aspects of that worked and what didn't work. And, certainly in healthcare, there's a lot of processes that can use improvement. Anyone who works in the healthcare space could certainly attest to that. But really part of our process is to understand that and where are there ways that we can enhance that even before we overlay that technology to scale that. So I think that was a really great description of why that is such an important piece to success in any project. So one of the stories that I've heard you tell a number of times is when I was first joining Providertech. So, obviously we already had this history of working together as a client, and then I was joining the team even just to help on a couple small projects. And so there was a conference that was upcoming. So Ryan says, well, why don't you come to the conference next week, right? You understand this and you can work with our clients. And so he says, why don't you join us? So why not? So I jumped on a plane, and Ryan and I went to that conference, and it was really our first foray into really working together on the Providertech side. And so I remember very astutely a moment during that conference. We talked about what I do with Providertech. This is actually on our way home, right? We'd already had these great conversations with the attendees of the conference, and so we talked about what it was that you needed for Providertech, right? What functions did you need? What roles? And I remember you saying, well, what do you want to do, right? What really understanding that, aligning not only what the need at Providertech was, but what I desired as a potential employee. And so, why do you think that, I guess, is that something that you just inherently understand? Or how did you develop that perspective as a leader?
I mean, not to go back to, people, process, and technology. And I like to think that I can see good things in all people. But I mean, with you, Lisa, in particular, there was just, from day one, there was just a natural, like, cohesive working. I mean, and you probably like that with everyone you work with, honestly. So, but I mean, I think empathy, and we talk about that even with our clients. So I think it's not, it's our people, it's our clients. And so, being empathetic to those, and trying to understand their situation is just as important in leadership and approach to finding good people and to working with good clients. So I think it's part empathy, and I think at times too that may be a vulnerability, because if you're overly empathetic, and you need to be empathetic, but if you think about like radical candor, you also need to be very direct in your approach, and sometimes if you're not, then you're actually doing the people that you work with or that you're leading a disservice if you can't provide them that honest feedback so that they're able to get better. So I think it's really that combination of being empathetic, and look, we're not a drill sergeant here. We don't want to like being transparent doesn't mean you're giving someone orders, right? And I still remember one of the people who mentored me back in the day, Brian Raboyne, who first kind of taught me servant leadership, actually, when I was at ClearData. One of the things I learned there, and I was like, oh, servant leadership, what does that mean? And in the simplest form, it's like, hey, like, if I'm going to lead you, I've got to be able to show you how to do it, right? I've got to be your guide, right? So I got to be able to understand your situation and take you to the next level. So if I'm going to, lead you to sweep a room, then I better be the darn best, person sweeping. So here's how we're going to do it. We're going to do it together, right? So I think it's a combination of that empathy and servant leadership, and then being able to kind of go above and beyond and try to leverage what you've learned to pass that on. And you've got to do that at times in a direct way, but not in a drill sergeant way. So I think for me, that's kind of how the secret sauce, if that makes sense, that's kind of how I put it together, and how I would, lead teams and inspire people to be part of the team, would kind of incorporate those ideas, right, of empathy, servant leadership, and radical candor, or being very direct in your approach to providing feedback.
Yeah, I agree. I think those are all really important characteristics to round out a leadership style, right? They all have to be present. Like you're saying, there could be a vulnerability if you have one more than the other. And so I think that was a really well said in terms of bringing those pieces together to really be the type of leader that your team, is excited to work with and beside. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So let's just shift a little bit of a broader view for a couple minutes here. So I would like you to share with our listening audience here a little bit about what do you think are one of the most or some of the most promising things that are up and coming in the healthcare IT space that people should have on their radar, right? And some of these things may be things that are happening within Providertech. Some might be things that are happening in a future state of provider tech on our roadmap. So we would love to hear what your thoughts are in terms of being an expert in the healthcare IT space. What should people have on their radar?
So as I type this question into Chat GPT, well, what's on everyone's mind these days, right? Generative AI, isn't that it? So funny enough, I did actually, I did type this, I typed it into Chat GPT just to kind of, align like what the right answer is over here from what like the answer is from everybody else in the Chat GPT world over there. But, it's a little scary, right? The generative AI. And I think I was told today that Windows 11 just released the generative AI into Windows operating systems. And so you can go into like things like Excel and say, hey, instead of you actually have to thinking about writing the right equation or formula for whatever problem you're solving, you can tell it to write it for you, right? Or you can have it code you a website or write a blog or give a diagnosis. And I think that some of the diagnosis stuff is actually like pretty promising. It's again, where does that leave the human beings at the end of the day? But I think that certainly the generative AI with the right guardrails can be extremely promising in the healthcare space. But the other thing, as I look through the list that Chat GPT suggested, and for me, it's obviously going to be population health management is most important. But it was on the list here too. So if we think about, I mean, it's a problem ultimately that right ChatGPT isn't going to solve. It's not going to go talk to the patients. It's not going to say provide empathy right to those patients that hey, how do we get them to do something that they're not naturally inclined to do? How do we solve, like it's scary that the diabetes and the obesity and some of these things. That's the population health management, right? It's like, how do we get people to be healthy? Because at the end of the day, you're not going to live longer by like doing less from a chat GPT perspective, right? You need to be healthy. You need to get to the gym. You need to eat the right things, and those are preventative measures. And if so be it, you end up with a chronic condition or something like that, then you need to stick to your meds. So all these things are extremely important, and they require really some human intervention and the right nudges. And I think that's there's huge problems that we're trying to solve, and ChatGPT isn't going to solve those. And I think it really comes back to the people process, and then the technology to help with those interventions and to better manage the care. So for me, population health would be number one, and then ChatGPT would be probably like pretty far behind it.
One of the tools in the population health management problem to solve, right?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah,
technology is third, not first. Right. People, process, technology.
Right. Absolutely,
especially right? Generative AI. Scary.
Right. And there's a lot of things that it can assist with, but I think there's a hybrid space there where we can create some efficiencies and scale some of that information using tools like that, but there's still always going to be the need for that human intervention, right? Humans helping along other humans, patients in this case, along the process. So,
absolutely.
All right, so let's wrap up today with one last question. I would love to hear, as we talk about Providertech, how it came about, the journey along the way. I would love to hear a story from you that makes you really excited about when you think about the work that you've done and that Providertech has done and is doing with clients. Is there a story that really stands out to you that you can say, yeah, that's why we do what we do?
Yeah, I mean, and Lisa, obviously you'll remember this one. I think this one really touched all of us at the end of the day. A lot of work went into it, a lot of effort just to acquire the client at the time, a large healthcare system. We were working with a great advocate of our work and of our program, Dr. Sinha. And we were working on a population health project to identify at-risk patients who could potentially be susceptible of lung cancer. So we developed a cohort based off of certain certain criteria, how many pack years, smoking pack year history, and age, and other things that said, hey, these are the potential at-risk patients who might have potentially could have lung cancer based off of the problem and the expertise. Who again, the expert Dr. Sinha worked very closely, and his team to define that population. And so very early on in the program, when we just first started doing outreach to the patients, primarily using text messaging, we were able to get some patients to respond. And we identified one patient who looked like, she went in, she said, okay, sign me up. I want to do this lung cancer screening. It looks like I might be at risk. And so she went in and got the first scan, and the scan came back positive for potentially to have lung cancer. So she continued along the course of the treatment, and ultimately it was caught early, right? So it was, when lung cancer is caught early, it's much more treatable and you can save lives. So it was caught early, right? It was caught early because we sent that text message, and we played a small part, but it was something that I think touched all of us, because ultimately, maybe if we didn't send that text message, she doesn't catch that lung cancer early. She doesn't have the treatment and doesn't get it corrected. And so there's a terrible outcome. So in a way, like, you think about it like, oh, we played this little part in saving someone's life. And that was like, and it was just so much hard work that went into that. It was just like, I think we all shed a few tears at the moment when, like, oh, no way. It's almost like we were taken back. It's like, this is why we're here. This is why we do this. Like, it's not just for us, right? It's for the people, and that's population health, right? It's caring for the people and doing our part in a better outcome for the greater good. And so that, for me, it was pretty easy to that I went right to that moment in time, and it was amazing, as you know.
Yes. Yeah, indeed. I certainly remember that call, right? And hearing about that story. So yeah, that was definitely a story that stands out in my mind as well. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I want to thank you so much for spending some time with me this afternoon and telling Providertech's story and the journey from where it started to where we are today. Very exciting to, I guess, reminisce on this path a bit with you. And
sure.
Excited to share this with our audience and our clients, and those of you that are interested in learning more about Providertech and wondering who we are. That's a good intro to who we are and why we do what we do. So, Ryan, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate your time and your perspective and your idea to launch this company so many years ago. So thank you so much, and have a great rest of your afternoon.
All right. Thank you. And here's to more of those happy patients.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to Happy Hour Happy Patients. Please consider subscribing on your platform of choice and share your favorite episodes with other healthcare workers who need a bright spot in their day. You can connect with my team and me directly by going to providertech.com and clicking on Connect with Us. You can find the link to this in the show notes below. Have an awesome week.